Now, Josh Frydenberg is going to present a new Sky News documentary, and it's due to premiere at the end of the month. It's called Never Again, the Fight Against Antisemitism, and it'll delve into the rising tide of anti-Semitism in Australia since the October 7 attack on Israel by Hamas. For the former Treasurer, this goes beyond politics. He speaks with prominent Australians, including survivors of the Holocaust. I'm happy to say that Josh Frydenberg joins me here now in the studio. We just saw Canberra, a room that you're very familiar with, but I'm more than happy to have you here, Josh, for, I think, an equally important discussion.
Nice to be with you, Laura.
Thank you. Despite my insistence, you have not come on my show for the last year and a bit, I'm sure. But here you are, and you've done this documentary for Sky News. Why is this so important?
Well, it's been frightening to see the explosion in anti-Semitism here in Australia since October the 7th. And I wanted to tell that story. I wanted to tell the human story of the lives that have been upended by the violence, by the intimidation, by the hate of anti-Semitism on our streets, on our campuses, towards our businesses. And I wanted Australians to know that this is not just the Jewish community's fight, this is Australia's fight, because the Australian values of tolerance, diversity are now literally under daily attack.
So what are you talking about? For those of our viewers who aren't Jewish, what are you talking about? How has your life changed? How have those you've spoken to, how have their life changed in Australia since October 7? Is it more this threat of anxiety that now runs through their lives, or have they changed the way that they live?
Well, it's been a combination of things. There's certainly the rise in anxiety and fear about openly displaying your Jewishness, your faith here in Australia. But there's also been not just isolated incidents, a series of incidents across the country which has seen unacceptable violent conduct. It started just days after the October the 7th attack on the steps of the Opera House, where people were targeting the Jewish community of Australia. F the Jews, where are the Jews? And that was even well before Israel had responded to the atrocities of October the 7th. Then we saw a violent demonstration in Caulfield, a largely Jewish suburb of Melbourne. And that followed reports that Jews were responsible for burning down a particular business. It turned out to be completely false, of course, and the police made that clear. But that was after this riot had been through the Jewish community, including outside the place of worship. And then we've seen the doxing of 600 Jewish creatives, people who would have otherwise found themselves much more comfortable on the left of politics and the centre-left of society, yet they felt abandoned by that side of the community because their names had been made public when they were simply seeking a safe space to talk about what was happening to them. Then we've seen the boycott of Jewish-owned businesses here in Australia. We've seen death threats against families and a whole series of other examples of harassment and intimidation.
And we see universities as well, bubbling tension. They're not quite on US college campus levels at all, but it certainly is bubbling. We've had these discussions in the past, Josh, where Jewish people thrive in liberal democracies like ours when there are those central tenets of free speech that are allowed to flourish. So how do you wrestle with the idea of free speech on university campuses, but anti-Semitism as well? I'm talking about the pro-Palestinian protesters who can often be loud and passionate. So how do you...
And violent and intimidatory.
Yeah, that's right.
And this is the point.
I guess...
Free speech is a common sense test. Of course, it's a fundamental value, free speech, but not when it's leading to intimidation, to violence. And when you talk specifically about universities, this is now the front line. This is ground zero, as a young student makes clear in the documentary, for anti-Semitism. Because we're now seeing these camps of hate, which should be closed down and cleared. we're seeing in just the last week a terrorist flag hoisted in one of our universities. We've seen students out publicly showing their support for Hamas, a listed terrorist organisation in Australia. We've seen the chant of "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," which security experts make very clear in the documentary that this is an inherently violent statement that has no place on our streets.
Anthony Albanese was asked about this yesterday, and I think this is the thoughtful one that he's come up with. He said, well, it's against a two-state solution. Is that the fundamental problem with it, as well as
the fundamental problem is it's calling for the abolition of the State of Israel. And that's why it has no place.
Yeah.
Just like globalising the Intifada, which is another call you hear on universities, has no place, because the Intifada was the bus bombings, the cafe bombings that led to thousands of innocent lives being lost. And these are the red lines that our university leaders, that our political leaders, that our law enforcement need to draw, that haven't been drawn to date. And I think our university leaders, certainly some of them, in dereliction of their duties, because their duty is to create a safe space on campus, not just for Jewish students, but for all students. And the behaviour to date has not been the case. And you heard, from the Education Minister who needs an education about what is the real meaning of these statements. In that one grab of Jason Clare just yesterday, he actually showed the lack of moral clarity that so many of our political leaders, both here and overseas, are bringing to this issue. He said, on the one hand this and on the one hand that. No, Jason Clare, there is right and there is wrong. It is wrong to call for suicide bombings against innocent civilians. It's wrong to call for the abolition of the State of Israel that was established in 1948 based on thousands of years of Jewish continuity with the land of Israel. And it's this demonisation of Israel. It's holding Jews in Australia responsible for the actions that are taking place thousands of miles from our shores, which is wrong. And that's why it's Australia's fight. And I've been contacted, Laura, by so many non-Jewish Australians since the documentary has been revealed, because non-Jewish Australians get this point just as Jewish Australians. This is about the type of country we want Australia to be. And one university in particular, Monash, where it was named after Australia's greatest general, Sir John Monash. When he died, 250,000 Melburnians out of a population at the time of close to 1 million turned out on the streets to pay their respects. He was the foundation president of the Zionist Federation of Australia. He was a proud Zionist. And just yesterday, you've got Monash University students saying they don't want Zionists on their campus. Well, my message to those students is they need to find another campus, because Monash University, named after Sir John Monash, will welcome Zionists today, tomorrow and forever.
Can I ask you about, there is a fine line sometimes between anti-Semitism and criticism of the Israeli government and Benjamin Netanyahu. Where is that line? Because I think after 7 months of the war, you say there is right and wrong, but there's a lot of grey areas in war. And I think what people, Australian Jews as well, are struggling with the death toll in Gaza
and
seeing children killed. So, you can say right and wrong. There's a lot of Jewish Australians and Australians per se that do criticise Benjamin Netanyahu, but they are great supporters of Jews. Is that recognised by you?
It's a really good question. It's certainly recognised by me, because what I put to security experts in the documentary is, if they were advising the Australian government after an event such as October the 7th, if it occurred in Australia, what would their response be?
Absolutely.
And their response, unequivocally, unconditionally, was go after the terrorist organisation Hamas. And this is the challenge. Hamas have built tunnels not to protect civilians, but to protect their militants.
Yeah, but they're often these cowards are in Doha. They're in marble palaces far away from Gaza, while their people suffer.
And that's the heart of the problem. But as long as Hamas has a military capability in Gaza, it's a threat to the state of Israel. You see the daily rocket attacks. And so from Israel's perspective, it's about trying to, as far as possible, diminish that military capability that Hamas has. And I think that's a unified, uniform position across the United States, across Australia and elsewhere, that Hamas has no place in a two-state solution, in a peace treaty going forward in that region. But I think what is super telling about what's happened since October the 7th, and I think it's really important for viewers to understand, is that the timing of this attack was as Israel was about to normalise relations with Saudi Arabia.
That's right.
And the home of Mecca and Medina. And this followed the Abraham Accords, where Israel normalised relations with the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco. And we've also seen, of course, long-standing treaty arrangements between Israel and Egypt and Israel and Jordan. So it was the other Arab states who had recognised Israel's right to exist that Hamas does not recognise Israel's right to exist. And that's the fundamental problem. Israel can make peace with its neighbours in the region, and they want to make peace with Israel.
There's a ceasefire deal that Hamas has struck with Qatar and Egypt this morning. This is while the IDF strike targets in Rafah, heavily populated area. But Benjamin Netanyahu says they don't meet his terms. Again, it adds another layer of complexity to it all. But what is, Australia's role here? How should we respond as civilians and the political leadership as well? I mean, because often it's been said in the past that calling for a ceasefire has been seen as anti-Semitic or anti-Israel. Is that right? Do you see it that way?
I think that the point is there can't be a ceasefire as long as Hamas continue to attack, Israeli targets and take the lives of innocent civilians. Yeah. But of course, a ceasefire is going to be required in the longer term, in the medium term, as both the Palestinians and the Israelis move to, normalise that relationship. But with respect to this, recent news, you've obviously got to wait the detail and the final agreement, because there've been so many stop-starts in this process. But what is also very clear from this documentary, hearing from Australian political leaders, is that they value the bilateral relationship with Israel and with Australia. And what is also very clear from the Australian Jewish community, from Holocaust survivors to other leaders in the community, is that they are Australians first. And they want what is best for Australia. But they also want their Australian leadership to stand up against what is wrong. And hate, intimidation, violence and anti-Semitism is clearly wrong.
Josh Frydenberg, it's good to see you. I hope to have you on set speaking to me again soon, not in a couple of years.
All the very best.
Well, it's not a commitment from him, but I've heard that laugh before. Hopefully soon, Josh. Thank you. But you'll be seeing Josh Frydenberg again very soon. The documentary, Never Again, The Fight Against Antisemitism. It is hosted by Josh Frydenberg, and that will be in full on Tuesday, the 28th of May at 7 p.m, right here on Sky News.